My number one metric I'm measuring myself by and I'm measured by within the business is, are we growing revenue year on year?
That's Johnny K. Johnny is the Chief Commercial Officer at one of the UK's leading media platforms, Versus, which focuses on culture and shaping football's impact on music, art, activism and so much more.
And I thought I'd never be able to sell anything. Like I could sell Boiler Room, but I could. It was Versus.
In today's episode, you'll learn about Johnny's rise from school exclusion all the way through to Chief Commercial Officer.
I'm not a very talented person. I'm not. I'm not saying that out of modesty.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely not. But there's just two things.
How Johnny helped take Versus from 60k to millions in revenue.
Every single cold email I sent for my first 6 months said,
You'll learn about how to stand out in highly competitive roles.
it's taken me years to figure this out. For us, the things that are important.
And so much more. And guys, you know what to do. If you're enjoying the content, please make sure to like, subscribe. Let us know how we're doing, guys. Now, enjoy the show. Hi guys, welcome to another episode of What My Best Friend Does, where we talk to best friends in the hope of inspiring you to take immediate action. Today, I'm talking to my best friend, the Chief Commercial Officer, Johnny. How you doing, bro?
I'm good, mostly. I'm coming off the back of a very long couple of days.
Very long couple of days?
But a long couple of days living my dream, really. So I have to say I'm good.
I love that.
How about you?
I'm doing very well. Also been a busy time, but hopefully after this conversation, you'll be energized, because typically that's how I feel, because I love doing this, bro.
No doubt.
Yeah. We like to start with a little icebreaker. What did you want to be growing up, bro?
I'll be honest, I didn't want to be anything.
Okay.
I really was not thinking about careers when I was a kid. And it's
Yeah.
a classic thing, people saying they want to be like a fireman or a footballer. I think when I was really young, before probably the age of 9, the dream probably would have been a footballer.
Yeah.
But once I got to like 10 and I started growing too quickly.
Just vibes.
It was just vibes, really. That dream was never going to happen. And my younger brother was a much better footballer than me.
Yeah.
He ended up playing for Tottenham.
Oh, wow.
At academy level,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
first team level. So he kind of fulfilled that dream for both of us.
Yeah.
I was just going with the flow, man.
Okay.
Which caused problems later on. But I think it was a nice way to grow up.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, we'll get onto it. Well, like, you started the conversation by saying you're living your dream, and like, to the listener, Johnny is the Chief Commercial Officer at the social platform Versus. But before we get into that, let's take it back, because you mentioned the fact that you didn't necessarily have goals and aspirations, but how is it that you've gotten to this point where you are living your dream at this moment in time? So maybe take it from like secondary, like through to university and beyond.
Yeah. Secondary school was tricky for me.
Oh, is it?
I got expelled from my first secondary school.
I swear.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
I wasn't that academically focused. I did find the work stimulating. Like, I listened in lessons, but when it came to the time to like do homework, I just did none. I actually went to boarding school.
Oh, did you?
I went to a school called Christ Hospital.
Yeah.
As you know, our mutual
Yeah.
friend AJ and Toto went there, which is technically an independent school, but one that prioritises kids with a high level of needs and then offers financial assistance. So I had a financial assistance to go there. I was very lucky to get a place there. But I just remember really clearly, I was talking to Toto about this actually last week, when the teachers were like, right, it's time to go to your room, do your homework. I knew that all my friends were actually going and doing work. I just couldn't do it.
Really?
I was going and playing Football Manager usually for like 3 hours, and then when it'd be time to meet up with friends again, I'd meet up with them and I'd think, this isn't going to end well for me, but I just didn't have it in me to work.
What age did you get excluded at?
At 16, it was the day before my GCSE started. I was fairly notorious for being naughty,
Yeah.
but had never been caught for anything, mostly because we would wear our balaclavas when we were out doing our naughtiness.
Yeah.
And I got caught doing something very, very silly. And when that happened, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
And technically I was allowed to come back to the school every time I had an exam to sit my GCSEs, but the school goes to 18, and the day the exams finished, they were like, that's it, you can't come back.
Boom. So you had to go somewhere else for sixth form and college.
Exactly,
so,
yeah.
Although it like sounds like it could have been like a traumatic experience. It didn't like impact you like having to sit a year out, do any of this. You was able to continue education.
Exactly, yeah. It was extremely traumatic. I already had abandonment stuff going on. I can only know this with hindsight, having done some work on myself.
Yeah.
Getting excluded from that school, away from all my friends, was very challenging. But yes, not having my academic sort of path disrupted was a massive help.
And so with that happening, you mentioned it being traumatic. Was that like, did it flip a switch? And like, did you think, okay, I'm going to go to sixth form now, I'm going to knuckle down, like I want to go to university, or like take us back?
No, for me, I would say there's never been a real flip switch. It's been gradual. And that was one important part of the gradual process, where I did work harder for my A-levels than I had them for my GCSEs. And then again, when I went to university, I worked slightly harder than I had for my A-levels. And then it carried on through every job, to the point where now I work significantly harder than I ever have.
Okay. If it makes you feel any better, I went backwards. so I was very like naturally smart in secondary school, and sixth form I did well, and then I went to university. I just decided, you know what? Who cares? I'm just gonna have fun. It was Vibes FC for me. But yeah, here we are. So you know, we all get there in the end. So yeah, like, university for you, like what did you go and study? And at this point, do you have an idea as to what it is you want to do yourself?
So I studied English Lit at Goldsmiths. I was meant to do economic history at LSE.
Yeah.
I went to the school I ended up going to for sixth form. It was a state school in Birmingham, but extremely high achieving one, a selective grammar school where most of the kids were doing finance, law, dentistry or medicine. And I got somewhat, I'd say, brainwashed into that.
Yeah.
You know, you end up being like the people around you, right?
Of course.
And I thought my easiest way in was to do an economic history degree at LSE. They gave me a lowered offer due to my sort of like family background history stuff, which is cool that they did that. And initially I didn't make the grades. When I didn't make the grades, I thought, why was I going to LSE, London School of Economics, to do economic history? I was like, that just isn't me. Yeah. And I went into clearing. I saw English at Goldsmiths, and I actually then, through a remark, ended up getting the grades to go to LSE.
Oh wow.
And thought, I know that's just not the right thing for me to do. Yeah. And doing English at Goldsmiths felt like a little bit of a rejection, not just of my previous decision, but the environment I'd been in for the last couple of years in like an extremely academic sixth form. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And that's what I went and did. And when I was there, did I have any idea what I wanted to do career-wise? Absolutely not.
No, and I think it's like that for a lot of people. And I think it's good to highlight that even at that point, you didn't know. No. I asked this to all of my guests, like, do you feel like university is worth the price of admission?
For me, it was. I was the last year where I only paid $3,000 a
year. Yeah, fair.
You know, so for me, at that price, it was worth it, because whilst I didn't figure out what I wanted to do, I did find my academic course stimulating. In the end, I just picked the subject that I enjoyed the most. That was the right decision. Yeah. I am so happy I didn't go and do a business degree or go and do economic history or anything else like that. That was a slightly more vocational. Picked the subject that I enjoyed the most. It gave me 3 years of deep diving on the subject I just enjoyed most in school. Yeah. But what it did more than that is it put me around people, mainly from different backgrounds. Yeah. I think that was a massive thing. I think it was a real wake-up call going to university, and you turn up and one part of it was you realise how much wealth there is in the country.
I completely agree.
It's really crazy. People who consider themselves to be normal and have had normal upbringings in the university holidays, you go to their houses and they live in, you know, their parents live in what I would consider like mansions and, you know, amazing townhouses in like central London. And I think a lot of people find that quite alienating, which of course I did too. But there's the other part of it where it opens your eyes up to opportunity.
100%.
The other side of it was being a Goldsmiths is an incredibly creative, artistic school. And for the first time ever, I was around people who had genuine ambitions of being writers, musicians, you know, working in the creative industries. Really, in neither of the schools that I went to was that promoted as kind of a viable option. Yet at Goldsmiths, kind of everyone was planning on going into the creative industries. Yeah. So it was huge for me for that reason as well.
Damn. Like, first and foremost, I'm going to say, like, I completely agree. Like, when I went to university, I remember going to, like, some of my friends' houses because I'm just from Chadwell Heath, that ends. And I was like, people actually live in houses this big.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I thought this only happened. I thought they were, like, fake houses that they rented, like, for a film set. And then also, like, I'll be real with you, like, before I went to university, I don't think I'd heard of Bali. And I'm like, oh, what? People actually get the plane to Australia. Like, when I was meeting people, oh yeah, I just did a gap year. Gap who? I was like, what's this? So, like, in terms of, like, expanding your horizons,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. And it sounds like, yeah, from the art standpoint as well, it really exposed you to things that were out there. And I think that's one thing, like, when I even look back at my journey and university experience, I don't think I made the most of, like, really exposing myself to the creative industries. Like, I had some friends who did it, but to anyone who's listening to this, just if you're thinking of going to university, if you're at university, make sure you expose yourself to as much as possible, especially with the fees what they are now. But okay, you finish a degree, you want to get into the working world. Like, had you started thinking about some type of career before leaving uni, and how quickly do you get a job? Because I know it's quite quick, actually. It's like the very next weekend or something.
Yeah,
like
it was.
mad.
I was the first person, I believe, in my whole academic year to get a full-time job.
That's mad.
And to take it back a little bit, between school and university, in that summer, I'd had my first ever full-time job, where just for that 6 weeks, I took a job working in a call centre for BT.
Okay.
Me and my girlfriend at the time, we were both 18 years old. We went in for this assessment day because we both wanted a job to, like, earn some money. We also wanted some work experience to put on our CV. And we went in with a group of probably 20 people, and you had to do like a mock sales call. You had to do a little bit of a presentation. And at the end of it, me and one other person got pulled out. They were like, Johnny, we're going to talk to your side. I was like, oh, all 18 people are getting the job, apart from me and this other person. And actually what they said was, based on how you performed in this assessment day, we're going to put you in the tier 1 team.
Wow.
And that was the team selling BT phone, TV and internet to people that had left in the last year. So it was like the most challenging sell.
That's not,
I think the target was to sell 3 packages a week, whereas on other teams they were selling like 20 a week or something like that, because they were just calling people that were warm leads. And I was like, wow. And I ended up doing this job at 18. I was only there for 6 weeks. I think I was the youngest person in the entire office, and I was just killing it. I was like beating the sales targets, and in the end they were trying to get me to stay on and not go to uni and do that as a full-time job, which of course, huge respect to the people that were doing that role, because it's an incredibly difficult sales job, but I wanted to go to uni. And I ended up quitting. Actually, we didn't do the full 6 weeks. We quit after 4 weeks because I was like, this is relentless. Why am I spending my summer holiday in an office from like 8 till 6 doing sales? But I caught the bug for it. So then by the time I got to the end of my degree and I didn't really have much sense of what I wanted to do, I thought maybe I'll do a sales thing. So I looked into sales jobs. And when you graduate, I think the one job that gets advertised to you more than any other,
recruitment,
working in recruitment. And I shopped around and I found one recruitment company where at my interview, they brought in like a couple of 25-year-olds who were both making upwards of £120,000 a year.
Wow.
And it was like, wow. And it just seemed like a good laugh as well. And that amount of money at that age, I thought, I'll have some of that.
The game's done.
I thought that's what I'm going to do.
Just going back to that first sales job, like you said you caught the bug for it. Like, were you just naturally good? Like, did they teach you some intangible skills that you've been able to take through your career? Yeah,
there was a lot of sales skills and sales training, a lot of objection handling. The thing that was so challenging about that sales job compared to any other was the level of compliance. Like, you couldn't use specific wording to try and sell to people. You had to use specific wording, and they had a team, an entire floor of people just combing through all the calls, listening to calls back. And I remember in my first week of doing it, the guy that I had sort of become closest friends with got let go because twice in his first week, he just got wording slightly wrong. And because of the level of compliance when it comes to having to sell people that sort of product, they can't stand for it. Wow. So that was really tricky, learning to sell within a really narrow framework. I never had to do that again. But I think starting with that as my base, it did give me a good platform.
And to the listener who's maybe looking for like a summer job, would you recommend that they cut their teeth in sales as early as possible to start learning those intangibles?
I do, but it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. You
So
have to have thick skin.
Yeah, and at 18 years old, sitting
Yeah.
in a call centre with a bunch of people, a lot of whom are like in their 30s and 40s, it's a big ask. I'm
Yeah.
surprised looking back that I chose to do that.
Yeah.
Even telling you the story now, I'm like, I
And
can't
it sounds like
believe
it
I
went
did
well.
that. And it did go well.
Yeah.
It did, but it was a weird thing to do.
Yeah, and all right, so you come out of uni, you're looking for your first sales job. We land in recruitment. How does that go, and how long are you there for?
I was there for a year and 3 months. Some elements of it were amazing, and some elements of it weren't as good. The bits that were good were that it was incredibly fun. It demanded an incredible amount of hard work and dedication. Like literally, you would put the phone down, and when you pick it up, you would immediately be expected to dial another number. From memory, on average, because there were screens that showed your number of calls and call time, I think I was making 100 calls a day on average. Something like that was the norm, which I count as a good thing. I think for your first job in sales to be one where you are just calling either hiring managers trying to get them to give you jobs, or you're calling candidates trying to get them jobs, it's like a great way to start. The things that weren't as good were the ethics and morality of how the job was operated were very shaky.
Yeah.
And the sort of practices that were kind of expected because they worked, but kind of compromised the lives of other people you didn't know who were genuinely looking for honest work. It didn't really sit right with me. And over time, that did start to chip away. And the thing that was really interesting is that when I told them I was going to leave, I didn't have another job lined up. And I literally said to them the reasons why. And I think that they sensed very clearly that when someone has that sort of motivation to leave, there's no convincing them, because I was starting to do quite well.
Yeah.
And they were like, Johnny, you can go now. And I was on gardening leave for a month.
Wow.
Only time in my career I had gardening leave was then. I was 22 and I had no work for a month, and I just used that month to get my next job.
And where did that take you?
At The Guardian.
Oh, okay.
That's where I landed. And I have to shout out a friend called Alex who had got a job at The Guardian straight out of uni. And he was a very similar character to me in that did not work hard in school. Even at uni, he'd found it really challenging. But he pulled it together in his final year of uni and then got a job at The Guardian. And he said to me, doing your job in recruitment, it'll be quite easy for you to get a job at The Guardian. I was like, how? And he was like, they've got whole teams of people doing like ad sales. He was like, you should do that. I was so embarrassed about the prospect of him referring me and then me getting rejected. I thought that would cause me so much embarrassment among my friendship group that I just applied through the website and never told him.
Really?
Yeah.
Why were you so worried about embarrassing yourself in front of a friend?
At that point in my life, I was so concerned with what other people thought of me. And I think that, to be honest, if you want the real answer as to why I've got to a point where I consider myself successful, it's different now. But a lot of that has just been driven by anxiety and low self-esteem. And the work has just been an external manifestation of that. If I can just get to this level, then I'll feel okay about myself and everyone will think I'm a good person. In simple terms, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm quite in that place now, but that was a real driving force. And so much so that at that point, even though he would have got £1,000 referral fee, I didn't let him refer me. I applied through the website. Luckily, my CV obviously got picked out out of however many, impressed in a telephone interview, then a face-to-face interview. And in my interview, my final face-to-face interview, they said, have you got any questions for us? And I said, will I ever have to lie when I sell to people? And they couldn't believe that I was asking that. And they were like, why are you asking that? And I told them some of the stuff we were doing in recruitment. And they were like, you'll never have to do anything like that.
Yeah.
And that felt like a huge relief to me.
Yeah. And then, okay, you get the job and like you're doing ad sales. Like you've obviously come from recruitment to working for like a big corporation like The Guardian. Is it a lot easier, slower paced? And like sales must be a breeze coming from recruitment into that. No offense.
It was so easy.
Really?
It was so easy in comparison for a number of reasons. The hours were short, and The Guardian has an amazing work culture where it gets to 5 p.m, people start winding down. It gets to 5:30, people walk out, and if you're there at 5:45, the head of the department, who might say a little bit late, will come over to you, tap you on the shoulder and say, Johnny, go home.
Yeah.
There's no reason for you to stay here. That was so different. I've been pulling nights till 9 p.m. regularly in recruitment. No longer had to wear a suit. And I think the other huge impactful thing was being around, and no offense to the people in recruitment because they were the best salespeople I've ever been around, but in terms of just broader, wider interests. The sorts of people that worked at The Guardian, I was like, this is more my kind of place. And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with this, but for example, when I worked in recruitment, it would get to lunchtime and every single person, you just look around the office, because I sat in the corner, would be on the Daily Mail. I fundamentally believe that's an evil organisation. I'd be the one person reading The Guardian. So I then ended up working there. Values wise, it just didn't quite align. It aligned for other reasons, but in terms of my values, it didn't quite align. But working at The Guardian for many reasons did.
Can I just say, it's one thing like understanding your values. It's another thing being able to act on them. So like, even though we haven't even scratch the surface of your journey, I just commend you for being able to act on your values, because not everybody is like courageous enough to do that. And I think to the listener, like, if you feel like you are somewhere where maybe the people don't align with your values, like, here is an example of the steps you can take to get out of a situation and the benefits that come as a result. I digress. The other thing I was going to say is, okay, you get the job at The Guardian. What happens to your friend? Obviously, you bust him out of 1,000. Like, so what happens when he's like, oh, Johnny, like, fancy seeing you here. Like, so what actually happened with that 1,000?
When I got to my final stage interview, I obviously then told him, like, it looks like I might be getting a job. And he was a little bit like, what the hell? But I was very honest with him. I said to him, I was just so scared I was going to get rejected.
Yeah.
And I think reaching him on a human level, he was like, I get it, kind of. You've kind of effed me over, but I kind of.
Yeah, he's like, you're a dickhead, but
But it was a bit of a running joke for many years, because I'd see him in the office all the time. He worked in a completely different department. He still works there, actually. 10 years later, he still works there, and he'd always be like, "You messed me out of £1,000, man."
Bro. Mate, that's his food out of his pocket. Food out of his mouth. All right, so sounds like, you enjoy this job a lot more than the jobs you've held previously, but the story doesn't stop there. So, talk me through, like, what happens and why it is you decide to, take the next step.
There was two reasons. One reason's career reasons, and there's personal reasons. Okay. Which one do you want first?
Let's go with career reasons first.
The career reasons were that through being at The Guardian, I started to get a sense that whilst The Guardian was cool, that actually the sort of like advertising sales skills I was getting at The Guardian could be used to do something really cool. Because at this time I was starting to go to a lot of raves, like grime was having its second resurgence whilst I was working at The Guardian. I was going to all these grime raves, I was going to like these boiler room parties, I was going to like a lot of like football matches. I mean, it was all the whole way through I was going to football matches. And this sort of new media ecosystem was starting to build. And I was looking at that and I thought, I wonder whether I can use these skills to get involved in that. Because The Guardian's one publication, but what about other publications? Like Vice, for example, which I'm sure we'll come on to. So that was the career reason, was I started to think I can use these skills to do something even more aligned with my values. The personal stuff is I went through a whole race row thing there, believe it or not.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
With my boss's boss, who, to her credit, got me the fastest promotion in department history. When she was working 2 levels above me, she literally went to the head of the department and said, I need to promote Johnny, otherwise he's going to leave. And they did it. I think they promoted me after 9 months, which had never happened before. But her sense of what was and was not appropriate to say was skewed, to say the least.
One of those, I've been there. And it's a shame that we have to put up with it. But once again, coming back to what I just said, like, you understand that your values are at risk, so you start looking around, and then what happens? Is it boiler room next?
No.
So
I think you might know this, but my dream at that point was to work at Vice.
Okay.
I got an interview at Vice, sat down with the guy, and he said to me, Johnny, I would hire you in a heartbeat. You seem really compelling, you seem smart, you seem like you love our brand, but your experience is not relevant compared to other people we're talking to. Whilst I was doing ad sales at The Guardian, my clients were mainly local authorities. So like Dagenham and Redbridge Council. That's like Swindon Borough Council. Obviously Vice were working with Samsung and, I don't know, Google. And
it would have been an ad sales job though.
And it would have been an ad sales job, an Audi and these huge blue chip brands. And I had no experience doing that. And this guy said to me, if this is what you want to do, leave The Guardian. Go and get a job where you're working with that sort of brand. And I didn't do it straight away, but it really, really stuck with me. Then the race stuff started picking up pace. And I think that those two, that Vice interview, whoever that guy is, I don't know who he is, thank you. and the race thing, also thank that woman because she pushed me out at the right time, coalesced that I was like, I need to go and get a job where I am working with these big brands. And I ended up getting a job that to the people at The Guardian seemed like a bit of a weird move, going and working for a much smaller company called Contagious, who are an extremely well-respected marketing insights company. But I was only earning, I think my pay rise was like $3,000 on my base, and the commission was worse. But their clients were Samsung and Budweiser and Chelsea Football Club and Universal Music and Sony Music. And I thought, even if, because they already had those clients and I was doing new business, but I thought, who's going to know?
You can just,
On my CV, I can say I worked with that list of brands I just said. And hopefully, if I blend my experience at The Guardian with my experience working with the relevant brands in a slightly less relevant job, doing new business, selling mainly, it's like a software system that was a database of the best creative advertising work in the world. I was mainly selling that to agencies and brands. If I can take these two things together, I was kind of convinced on some level I could use that to go and get my real dream job.
Okay, sick. And before we get on to you getting like the first of your dream jobs, like you've just casually said it there, like, you know, I had the interview with Vice and he's told me to go and like leave The Guardian and get relevant experience. It's one thing being told go and get relevant experience. It's another thing actually being able to land the relevant experience. So to the listener who, especially as we get on to what you're doing with Versus and stuff, I know that to break into these industries, people expect you to have experience or to show like passion. Like, what was your approach to actually like finding that job at Contagion and being like, I know that I'm going to be able to sell myself if I land a job here? Like, were you very tactical with that application?
I was very tactical, yeah. I don't know, like I was shopping around and the guy at Vice had said this thing. I didn't ask for any other advice. I was like, right, this guy who seemed cool at Vice said, find a job where you're working with the big brands. I thought, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
If I was giving someone advice, I would say, ask around for more than just one person's opinion.
That
was a big problem in my mind when I was younger. I do it so much now, leaning into people with more experience for help.
Yeah.
But at, what would I have been? 23, 24 years old? I just wasn't doing that. But this guy, to his credit, had given me a little bit of advice. I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And I interviewed at all these different places. I couldn't tell you where now. And the one that was working with the biggest brands was Contagious.
Okay.
And I liked the people when I interviewed and they liked me. And I thought, why not just do this? And of course, once I then started, I then kind of forgot about the grand plan. Do you know what I mean? You start somewhere, you start doing well. And I was the best salesperson there in the UK. And you get a lot of praise and they're talking about development plans and you moving up into the management team. And this broad plan that I kind of had as to like what the purpose of this was kind of gone. And I was starting to see myself being there long term, the same way I actually had done at The Guardian, until something had snapped me into being like, actually, maybe there's more. And all that happened was that a job came up on LinkedIn working at Boiler Room, which really was my dream company.
Okay, so that literally like you're scrolling through LinkedIn and you see the job like ad sales,
brand partnerships manager,
boiler room, and you just click apply.
Immediately apply, like literally in that moment in work, updated my CV because I didn't have an updated CV. Obviously, I wasn't applying for jobs. Updated my CV, sent it off.
And then how quickly do you hear back?
It was a very long process. The process was 4 months from sending that to getting offered the job.
Yeah, but and I know this from like just hearing some other bits that you've done. Like initially you hear back quite quickly, right? And then they long you out for a bit, and then eventually you get the job. Like all these jobs that you've had, just thinking about it, it's like you've managed to stand out at every point. Some like obviously like you're a very talented person. Like to the listener who is trying to stand out, you know, because right now people are fighting for jobs left, right, and centre. To somebody who needs to fix their CV or is applying for jobs through LinkedIn, like what would your advice be to them to hopefully stand out enough to get that opportunity to like interview in person?
I'm just going to correct you. I'm not a very talented person. I'm not. I'm not saying that out of modesty.
Yeah.
I'm genuinely not.
Okay, I'll take it back. No,
there's just two things. I know how to communicate.
Yeah.
And I'm more passionate than anyone else.
Okay.
And that has consistently served me. Where when I've turned up in these rooms, it was the case at The Guardian. It was less the case at Contagious, just because I'd never heard of the brand, obviously, before I worked there. And it was the case at Boiler Room, where categorically I had more passion for working at that brand, not only than anyone else they were interviewing, but probably more than the people that were already working there.
Yeah.
And if you genuinely have that, but it doesn't tip into, and this is the hardest thing, being overly keen and annoying, if you can find that balance, you will always stand out.
Yeah.
That's been my consistent experience.
And like, just on that, like, do you feel like why is it that you're so good at communicating? Is that natural? Is it because you went to like the private school and like your education? Like, what is it that makes you such a good
Education helped. Like,
Yeah.
that I got a huge leg up at 11 years old with that school offering me a place and offering to pay the vast majority of the fees, like who I am. You know, and my brother got a sports scholarship to go to a private school as well. Props to my mum, because my mum figured out, this is going further back, that for 2 young mixed race boys being raised by a black mother whose father had passed away, God rest his soul, that actually, and we were both pretty talented, me more academically and my brother more sporting wise, that most independent schools would offer us either a totally free place or a mostly paid place.
Yeah.
My mum, I don't know how she figured that out, but she knew there was a story to tell that she could use that would help get us a good education. Fortunately, I went to a school where at the time I was there, 80% of people were on bursaries, and a third of those paid nothing. But my brother got offers from loads of different private schools who were all willing to pay at least some of the fees. So the level of education was obviously a huge step up for me. It made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And the other part of it, I don't know where it comes from, but I remember being in year 7, and in English we got given a task where we had to make a PowerPoint presentation on anything we wanted. And I did mine on Roberto Carlos. As a kid, I was obsessed with Roberto Carlos.
With the free kick?
With the free kick, with the outside of his left foot. Like, I don't know why, but that really had me.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with him.
Yeah.
So I did this presentation on Roberto Carlos, and I sort of integrated video. I figured out, bearing in mind in year 7, this is 2004, I figured out how to integrate video into a PowerPoint presentation. No one else had done this.
Yeah.
And I just talked about Roberto Carlos, and I felt incredibly nervous. And when I finished, the teacher said, well, obviously that's an A star.
Oh.
And I felt like the way I'd presented it was like, but actually it turns out that all the doubt was up here, and what came out of here, it didn't come across at all.
Oh, yeah.
And in that moment, that did something
Yeah.
where I thought, oh, I was so nervous and they didn't know.
Yeah.
That's my best skill. Is that it doesn't matter how scared, nervous, fearful I am up here or in here, what comes out of here sounds like it's pretty put together.
Yeah.
There's a lot of downsides to that when it comes to personal life as well,
Yeah.
where everyone always thinks you're all right and maybe I'm not. But when it came to work in a school setting first and then a professional setting, it's been hugely valuable.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, that brings us back to like the boiler room. The first question I had is like, you know, you mentioned when you went to Contagious, you had a 3K pay increase. When you go to boiler room, are you taking this job as a way of like increasing salary, or it was like, I just love the brand, I'm gonna get this job like regardless of the package? Or luckily the package was like a good one as well.
Yeah, it was.
You don't have
both.
to talk about the package, but yeah.
I'm happy to if you want. It was both.
Yeah.
I think at boiler room, my offer. They asked me what I wanted. The hiring manager, Sam, he's a great man, lovely man, who gave me a shot, and really that's where my career properly started. And they said, "What do you want?" And I think that at Contagious, I was on 35k basic, so I asked for 40k on my base, and they gave it to me, and I was so happy with that. 25 years old, I got 40k base. There was commission on top. There was like a team commission. I thought I was rich.
Yeah.
I thought that was an amazing package. So that was part of it. But I would have done that job for 20 grand a year. I would have done that job for 17 grand a year.
Yeah. Wow. What a place to be. And then to the listener who doesn't know, like, how would you define boiler room first of all, and then what did your role involve?
Boiler room, as far as I know, is the biggest music live stream company in the world. They put on predominantly DJ sets. They used to live stream all of them. They don't anymore. It all started in an East London warehouse where Blaze, founder of Boiler Room, incredibly smart man, used to put on like little parties for his friends, and one day thought, why don't we stick a webcam on this little boiler and film this DJ set? And the early DJ sets were like Fortet, famously was one of the early ones. And really quickly it started gathering pace online, where people, weirdly, no one had ever done this, it's obviously very common now, would log onto the internet to watch these DJ sets play out live in this tiny little room Then they started doing them in bigger East London venues, and it just grew into this huge global property that reaches hundreds of millions of people a month.
Wow.
And they, whilst I was there, it wasn't just DJ sets anymore. It was like live. I saw Georgia Smith came and performed in the office once.
Oh, wow.
I've seen the list of people I've seen at Boiler Room: Dave, Georgia Smith, AJ Tracy. I mean, Stormzy. Everyone really.
Wow.
It's something that in the era I was growing up in, as a late teen and early 20s, you just did if you were a UK artist on your route from underground to mainstream success.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what I was doing, we were meant to be coming in as a team to sell branded content. They were selling loads of branded events, as you can imagine. At this point, they're putting on events literally in almost every country in the world, including Palestine, including Syria. And brands would obviously want them to be associated with that, to put on branded events for them. We came in to sell branded content alongside that. Didn't really work.
Oh.
We reverted back to just selling more branded events. So that's what the job was. Going to brands and agencies saying, we've got this huge audience, we're the best in the world at putting on cool shows for youth audiences that get live streamed, then the set gets uploaded onto YouTube, and selling that to brands basically.
And like the type of brand you're selling into at this point, is it more of the Nikes, or is it big organizations? Like who's the stakeholder that you're dealing with now?
Well, this is a bit of a problem because they wanted us to try and sell to core brands, which would have been like alcohol brands, obviously Nike, Adidas, that'd be cool. Any clothing brand would be fine. And we started seeping out into doing partnerships with people like Bumble, the dating app. That was the biggest thing that I worked on. That over the year I was there, that was worth probably like £500,000.
Oh, wow.
And I'd never dealt with sales at that sort of value before. I have to admit that my boss, Sam, very much teed that up and very much held my hand through the process of like bringing them in as a client. It was by no means me really, but I got the credit for it because he gave me the credit. That's how much of a good person he was. But Boiler Room were a little bit unsure about working with that sort of brand. I think they had built what at that time was probably the most culturally credible media brand in the UK. And when we started doing partnerships with finance brands and dating apps, they looked at it and thought, is this going to kill our brand?
Yeah.
And the whole team got made redundant.
Wow.
After a year, which was, at the time, one of the most devastating things that had ever happened to me, because it felt like, as we've talked
You
about,
lost your dream.
the recruitment, to The Guardian, to Contagious, to Boiler Room, I was ready to stay there for the rest of my career.
Were you?
I really was, yeah. The other reason why they made us redundant is because they wanted to stop doing partnerships and transition into being a ticketing business. And I remember sitting in my exit interview and saying to them, that's a terrible strategy. That will not work. You will not be able to transition this business from being a predominantly media partnerships business to being a ticketing business. And I think they were sitting there like, why is this kid telling us this?
Here we are. Mate, so let's actually on that, like, so, we speak about the fact that you didn't know what you wanted to do. You have these like varying degrees of like, good and bad job experiences. You get your dream job. It's ripped away from you. Like, take us back to your emotional state at that time. Like, how were you doing? And like, how is it you regroup and move on to the next thing?
I was doing terribly. I was doing really terribly. And at times I really struggled with my mental health. And that was going on at that time for sure. In hindsight, it's so funny because it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I was hanging out with a girl that I worked with, and we were at her flat talking, and my phone rang. I remember this as clear as day. It was a recruiter I'd already spoken to about a couple of other jobs. And he was like, Johnny, I've got this wild card I want to talk to you about. I was like, go on. He was like, it is a UK media brand that is almost unknown, and it's football, music and fashion coming together. And I was like, well, those are literally my only interests. What's it called? He was like, they're called Versus. I was like, Versus, that little Instagram page that I follow. I was in the first 10,000 followers of Versus as a consumer. So I was familiar with them. Had no idea what it was really. Other than that, the content they posted spoke to me. And in that moment, immediately I thought, I think this is the thing.
Wow. So, okay, you get that call. He introduces you to them. Yeah, like talk me through that process. Is it a quick interview? They offer you the job, and like I think like from knowing your journey, you're the first like boots on the ground. So like, okay, this is a great opportunity, but there's some risk. So yeah, like talk us through like the decisions that have been made.
It was a really funny one. So the other offers I had an offer to go and work at Hypebeast, and I had an offer to go and work at the British Fashion Council.
Oh bloody hell!
Serious jobs, much more security, more money in both cases as well.
Brand partnerships, sales?
Brand partnerships do at both.
Yeah.
And I said to my mum, I was like, Mum, I'm telling you this Versus thing. Because I'd already started to have thoughts around what would I do if I was to start my own thing. I wasn't ready at that point to start my own thing, but I was starting to think, what would I do? And I had seen at Boiler Room how the major sporting brands, particularly Nike and Adidas, were starting to like brief a brand like Boiler Room for performance briefs. It's like, it's a brief about running, yet they're briefing a music platform. I was like, why is that? Why is it that sport and music are coming together in this way? And that was starting to stir little thoughts in me. And I was always thinking about my own interests where, yeah, okay, I love football, but do I love music more? Maybe, but I also love like fashion. So when the Versus guys got in touch, it was like, I think this is the real opportunity. I knew, because at that age, I was still youngish. You know, I was 26, so I was the consumer still. And I knew that on a consumer level and also in terms of business opportunity, I just thought if I can go into the brands and say to them, look, I'm a 26-year-old mixed race boy from South London. I'm the consumer you're looking to speak to. And I'm telling you that the day of working with a fashion publication or a music publication or a football publication are dead. And actually the real space is where these things come together. I thought, how can they say no to that? I thought I could sell it because I believed it more than any of the other stuff I'd done, even more than Boiler Room. And I thought I'd never be able to sell anything like I could sell Boiler Room, but I could. It was Versus.
Wow. So you go into Versus, what's your role?
Brand Partnerships Director. I was Brand Partnerships Manager at Boiler Room. I got it upgraded to Brand Partnerships Director at Versus.
Okay.
Got a pay rise again. And the title was pretty meaningless. Bearing in mind, the team was Corey and Lewis, who started Versus, who were still doing a completely different job. They weren't even working on Versus full time. It was a side hustle still.
And they were at Complex?
They were at Complex UK, exactly. Jacob, who was a freelancer, who was also still mainly working on Complex. And then me and the four of us sat in a little box room in Victoria, and they were all working on Complex stuff most of the time. And I was supposedly doing Versus stuff.
Really?
And the job was just emailing agencies, emailing brands, trying to get meetings and convincing them this sort of long game that, look, you might not see it yet, but football's going through this incredible cultural change. We're just at the start of it. It's going to pick up pace. We're the only media brand talking about it. We're the only media brand covering this stuff.
Yeah.
And as a brand, you want to be first to the pulse.
Yeah.
Most brands did not buy into that in 2019.
Wow. As you've been talking there, my head is like overloaded with things I want to ask, because like I feel like, oh my God, I'm there at the start with you. You mentioned the fact there that you're emailing people, you're trying to get in front of these people, sell them the vision of Versus. Like I think when people see Versus now, they see all the cool collabs, like all of the footballers, all of the talent you're working with. But taking us back to that moment, like how easy was it to get in front of these organizations to pitch yourself, right? Because it's one thing being where you are now, but being in the first 10,000, I don't know how many followers they had when you joined.
30,000.
People don't know who you are. So like, what was that process like for somebody who's like actually got their foot in the door at like a startup, a scale up? Like, how is it you're actually getting in front of these brands?
Well, here's where the little experience I did have came in handy. Because whilst people may not have known Versus, a few people, not many, a few knew me.
Okay. From your time at Boiler Room?
From my time at Boiler Room.
Yeah.
None of the other work before that point was particularly relevant in terms of the specific contacts, but I had done a year working at Boiler Room, and I forget this actually. Every single cold email I sent for my first 6 months said, "Hi, it's Johnny. I've just joined Versus, having been at Boiler Room." So I was like using the credibility, the Boiler Room brand, to sort of like get my way in. So even for the people I didn't know, I was very much leaning on the fact that I come from Boiler Room. Obviously, people didn't know I'd been made redundant. I sort of made out that I deliberately made a choice to leave a music platform. to go to like a convergence culture platform that did cover music, but also covered football and fashion. So that's what I did. And then there was a few people, especially at the main brands like your Nikes and your Adidases and your Pumas, that I had met when I worked at Boiler Room. And of course, they were the first people I went to. But then, yeah, just a lot of cold emailing.
Wow. And like, is it emailing? Is it LinkedIn? Is it a bit of both? Like, where were you getting the majority of your success when you first
Back then, it was actually 90% emailing.
Okay.
That was, whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know. But my focus was emailing. Nowadays, because I have somewhat of a profile, LinkedIn is super easy, because most people generally will reply to me because they see the work, they see the followers, etc., etc. It's become an incredibly useful sales tool. Back then I was still building up my LinkedIn. So yeah, email mainly.
Okay. And like, going back to like recruitment, were you picking up the phone? Like, did you have numbers? Were you trying to call?
Nah, do you know what? I wasn't. And I feel like in media, that, in my opinion, had started to die a little bit of a death, which was so good for me. Like, having done serious telesales, the fact that it was such a shock when I joined Contagious even, because The Guardian was the same. It wasn't just recruitment, it was The Guardian as well. It was a telesales job ultimately, where it was all over the phone.
Yeah.
To go to Contagious and suddenly it's like, we don't really expect you to call anyone. You did have to every now and again. I'd say recruitment was the most. We'll call that 100%. We'll call The Guardian 80%. We'll call Contagious 50%. And then Boiler Room was like 10%, which is the same as Versus, about 10%.
Yeah.
On that scale, it was incredible not to have to call people anymore.
Yeah.
The good thing is, though, when I do need to make a call, I have no issues, worries about calling someone and just saying, look, we cannot do this partnership at that price.
Yeah.
Doesn't leave us enough because the conversations I used to have in recruitment, 1,000 times scarier than anything I have to deal with now.
Yeah. So it really set you up well. Where do I want to go with this? So you told us what like Boiler Room was, and obviously it was your dream at the time. You told us a little bit about how like Versus started, but like to the listener, like we can take the moment now. Like, how is it you would describe the Versus platform as it is today?
So Versus is a media brand and fan community that covers the intersection of football and culture and football and society. When we say football and culture, we're talking about football and music, and football and fashion. When we talk about football and society, we're talking about anti-racism, how football impacts the LGBTQ plus community, sustainability. Women's football sort of broadly falls within both. And yeah, I think we're the one media brand out there that genuinely speaks truth to power and uplifts marginalised voices.
Yeah.
It's football media for young, diverse audiences, basically.
I love
Lives
it.
predominantly on social channels. Instagram and TikTok are the hero platforms, but we do have a website and a YouTube, but mainly lives and breathes through Instagram and TikTok. Reach 50 million people a month globally now. Yeah, it's big.
And, I know from like, like being on your Instagram, like you got over 300,000 followers there. I think you got over like 500,000 on TikTok, probably more. You said something earlier. We had 30,000 when I started. So like, it's been like a 5-year journey to this point. Like, and you were like the first boots on the ground. So I'm going to have to give you a little bit of flowers, even if you want to be modest. Like, what have been some of the strategies that you and the team have deployed to help like that growth over the past 5 years?
Yeah, I can't take too much credit in the audience growth. I'm more the commercial growth. But the one
the commercial fuels the
well, and vice versa.
Yeah,
but the one part of editorial strategy that I did have a very significant impact on was at the end of 2019, which was my first year. Corey and I sat down, and Lewis probably as well, and we started to have conversations around how actually football was starting to become this impactful force in society, and that maybe there were more stories we could tell that weren't just football and culture, but were around this idea of football being this force for good. We couldn't really figure it out. I remember our last meeting at the end of the December of 2019, Corey saying to me, we try and cover, and he gave some examples of stuff we'd done. And I was saying, I think there's other things we can tell as well. But the truth was, I don't think there really was. I mean, I had a good idea, but how to actually lay it out practically, I wasn't too sure on. Obviously, the year then came in 2020, where you had the murder of George Floyd. That sparked the biggest global civil rights movement of all time.
Oh, wow.
And suddenly, we looked at that and thought, this is our territory. And it started with a piece that I actually wrote. It's crazy, right? When that was all going down, obviously football was becoming quite embroiled in Black Lives Matter. It was becoming very involved in a way that was really interesting.
Oh, like with the taking of the knee.
Taking of the
should
knee,
it be every game?
yeah.
And this
People,
and
you know,
that,
people like
yeah.
Tyrone Mings were turning up to Black Lives Matter marches, even though they were meant to be isolating because they were playing, and he was like, "F that! I need to go and support my people." It's a really interesting time, and we clocked that whilst there were loads of fan accounts from like the 80s and the 90s about what it was like to be a black, Asian, or mixed race fan going to football in this country, there was nothing from a modern perspective.
Wow.
And I was like, I've got stories about going to West Ham as a mixed race boy, and the stuff I've sort of seen and put up with, and the conversations that I have to have.
Let's take a moment, like, because I've obviously read like some of the stuff in background, and one of the things that really stuck out to me in one of the articles was the fact that you said, like, I didn't really feel when I was growing up that I experienced quote unquote racism. That was until I'd looked back, like, you know, I'd look back at my past and I realised, oh no, I had many racial experiences. So yeah, like, what were those experiences, and is it you came to realise that they were those racial experiences?
It's interesting, right? So I grew up in Battersea in South London, incredibly diverse area. It's less diverse now, but when I lived there, it was an incredibly diverse area. I then went to a primary school, and my first secondary school, because it deliberately targeted kids in need. It's a very diverse school. I think a third of the pupils were black or Asian. So I was just around people that looked like me, basically. And I think that when you're around people like that, in school, of course, there was like the odd idiot who would say racist things, but it would never be to me as like a fairer skinned mixed race. What would be to like the darker skinned kids, unfortunately. That was the reality of it. But I had a girlfriend, and on a leave weekend, we went to her hometown. She grew up in Kent. Very different. And we were 15. We'd been out drinking with a bunch of other young kids, and when it came to go home, my partner at the time, girlfriend, I think is more accurate, at the time, said to this couple who lived on her estate, "You going to come home with us? We're going to go home now." And he said, "I'm not walking home with her." N-words.
Wow.
And that was just like a lightning bolt straight through me that was really confusing, because I was like, what?
Yeah.
And I was really upset, really, as you can imagine, very, very upset. And it's funny because it actually was just around that sort of age that I started to go to football more regularly as well. And I think the thing with my football experience was that whilst it was rare, actually, to be honest, that it would be directed towards me, but it would be the one place where I would more commonly hear that sort of language.
Oh, bro. Even just like the chants, like I've been to West Ham, and I'll never forget, like they played Middlesbrough and Yakubu was up front, and they're like, "You're just a fat Eddie Murphy." like even though you laugh at the time, like the stuff that players have to endure, it is actually mental.
It's crazy.
When you reflect.
And there were incidents, like I remember going on a pre-season tour of East Germany predominantly, and I was with some fairly notorious sort of like former football hooligans. So when we got to this ground, there's all these like Eastern European people that like wanted to meet these like infamous men from the ICF.
Yeah.
And they would go shaking everyone's hands, and they like went and they got to me, and they just like wouldn't shake my hands.
Really?
And there was an incident when I went to Chelsea away once, and 2 West Ham fans were calling Ashley Cole a monkey.
Oh my God.
And yeah, I ended up, it didn't end well in one way or another. I'm not going to say what went on, and I ended up leaving the stadium and calling my mum, crying and saying I'm never going to football again. And it was just stuff like that would come up. And the thing that was most uncomfortable as the years went on were just the casual comments from people that I considered to be friends. And it was the classic attitude, because in my group at West Ham, it's me and there's a darker-skinned black guy called TJ. And the attitude was always, no, I'm not talking about you. You're all right.
Bloody hell.
But then, whatever it was that they would say. And over time, that really started to grate. And until that moment, and there's a lot of debate around how impactful Black Lives Matter really was, but I can say for certain in my settings and my experience of going to football, and the people around me who were also going to, the white people that I go to football with, it really changed something. Where it was during that period, and a big part of it was I wrote this piece. And although I didn't name anyone, it was very clear that I was calling people out who were around me going to football. And at first there was backlash, and I don't mean like serious backlash. I mean in WhatsApp groups, people being like, "You're being too sensitive. What do you mean?
Classic
I'm not racist.
dismissing. Yeah.
But over time, and when the movement started getting bigger and more people started coming out and talking about their experience, actually, it did start to create a little bit of space where people would say, actually talk to me about this thing.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, it makes me a little bit emotional thinking about it. Just thinking about the level of change some of my friends, because the thing is, right, I support West Ham. I'm obsessed with going to football. You know, some people are like, why did you continue going with people like that? They were the other young people at West Ham. But that period, they actually like listened. You know, they actually listened to what was going on, and it fundamentally changed things. And it doesn't mean they're perfect. I'm not perfect either. And every now and again, the odd thing gets said. But you know when it does, I say, settle down.
Yeah.
You can't leave that out. People go, yes, sorry. That never happened before. I didn't feel like I had the agency to speak up. And if I did, it would have got shut down immediately. So it did shift something. But in relation to Versus, that was the first story we told. Within a week, The Athletic basically wrote the exact same piece. They copycatted it.
Yeah.
And we were like, wow, we're having influence here.
Yeah.
And we then used that as a platform to go and speak on football and sustainability, football and the queer community. Around that time, thanks to Amy, who wasn't working for Versus at that time, is now our editor-in-chief, was our first women's football editor, was like, if you're being so forthright on these issues, where's your women's football coverage? We were like, you're right. Hired her, started going big on women's football, and really started to build this universe that was like not just the football and culture stuff, but was football, culture and society.
I love it. And like to, you know, I was talking to you off screen, and, you know, you can speak about, you know, whatever feels comfortable. When I look at a platform like Versus, obviously you got all of your followers, like nearly 1 million across all platforms, maybe more. Yeah, like in terms of like the business and the financials, like, yeah, you're writing these articles, like you're doing these collabs, but where is the moolah coming from? Like, where is your salary getting paid from? Like, obviously spoken about partnerships before, but yeah, like where is your focus split between everything that you do?
Yeah, well, it's a really good way the way you framed it, because I think that people do see me doing a lot of interesting stuff. You know, I get to meet players, I go on all these interesting trips that are paid for, My number one metric I'm measuring myself by and I'm measured by within the business is, are we growing revenue year on year? And these days within that, how are we making money from new areas as well? That's a bigger part of it now. In 2019, we made and 2020, we made most of our money through editorial partnerships, which meant that we were going and like doing a photo shoot for a brand. We'd then write it up into an editorial that would go on the website. We'd like editorialize it for Instagram. It'd go up there. We'd post it on Twitter, and it'd be like, Adidas have got a new boot coming out. We'd find like 3 rappers that had like a close connection to football, or 3 musicians, shoot them in the Adidas product. We'd like make a cool article about it, and we'd get paid for that. And in 2019, we made £63,000,
Wow,
which was not enough to cover our salaries and the cost of the office. So the other business that Corey and Lewis were working for, not Complex UK, but the company that was running Complex UK on a license, was willing to subsume those costs on the basis that if Versus ever became anything, that the person that ran that business, a guy called Austin, would have like a stake in Versus. And obviously we agreed to that. The following year in 2020, it was still mostly editorial partnerships again, and of course, COVID happened, so we weren't really able to go out and shoot much either. So it's mainly just like being paid to do written editorials, where the brand would just send us pictures. They'd be like, can you write this up? And we made £120,000, which might sound like a lot, but again, if you're talking about actually being able to pay 4 people, if you include
and
the
like any
freelancer, a salary, plus the freelancers that we need, plus we then got rid of our office because of COVID, obviously, still wasn't really scratching the surface. But then the following year in 2021, which of course is the year that COVID started to relax, we did a 700% increase in revenue year on year.
Wow.
And suddenly, no longer were we just doing photo shoots and written editorials, but we were doing video content. We were putting on events for brands for the first time. That became a really big part of the brand identity from like a brand perspective. And yeah, we just started doing bigger stuff for brands basically. And it was in that year, the first brands to majorly invest in us with proper money were Nike and Adidas. Those 2 brands, of course, they have within the football space, the people closest to genuine culture there. And I mean that in both brands, they'd said this Versus platform is worth supporting
Yeah.
with like serious investment to bring stuff to life for us.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine what that year must have been like, man, where in February and March, Austin, who's the person that runs that Woot media business that Corey and Lewis are working for, the one who's subsuming these losses within Woot, was calling me when COVID was still on. I was walking to my girlfriend's house, and he was like, Johnny, we're going to have to wrap up versus, like, you're going to have to come and work for Woot. I was like, I'm not doing that. And I was like, I'm telling you, just give it more time. I can see that we're going to get there. And he was like, look, well, in order to get to where we'd need to be, I think this year we would need to make £400,000. And even if we were to bring in £400,000, how are you going to deliver that level of work? There's literally only 4 of you working on the brand. Yeah. I was saying to him, give it more time. That year we ended up doing £850,000.
Wow.
So we did more than double that like stretch figure he put in front of us. And of course, at that point, we actually made a profit. We had enough to pay for our office. Corey and Lewis then came and worked for Versus full time. So did Jacob. We hired other people, and it was in 2021. Suddenly, it was like, we've got a real business here.
So on that as well, like as you're talking, I'm like fist pumping. I'm like, go on. But like you talk about the Nike and Adidas deals.
Mm-hmm.
When you were at Boiler Room, you said you had the Bumble deal, and it was your boss who helped get that over the line. With these Nike and Adidas deals, is it now like you're the main driver and you were the one who got these over the line?
That's exactly it, yeah. I was the one that built the relationship with the agencies and with the brand direct. I was the one that got the brief. Corey at that time was the person who put the creative response together. A little bit of input for me, but mainly him. I was the one pitching it back to the brand. It was me. Okay. I was a commercial team of 1 as well.
And like at this point, would you still consider yourself like a partnerships director? And like at what point is it that you transition into the role of chief commercial officer?
There was a role in between.
Okay.
And at that point, brand partnerships director was probably a fair reflection, because I was a doer. You know, I was just doing sales. I wasn't managing anyone. I wasn't doing any real like wider business strategy. I was just doing sales. Like 2021 and most of 2022, those were just the years of bringing the business. 2022 was a tricky year because, as you can imagine, right, we've done 700% growth year on year. And of course, in the long run, in terms of our brand story, you never want to have a year in these first few years where we go backwards. Yeah. It's like, how are we going to grow again? And also 75% of our revenue had come from Nike and Adidas. Yeah. And we knew fundamentally they just wouldn't invest as much the following year. We actually messed up our Nike project. Not that disastrously, but I'll speak candidly because it's a few years ago now. So this is the first time I think I can talk about it publicly. Nike weren't happy that we were also working with Adidas. And internally, between me, Corey and Austin, we had a lot of chats where we were like, are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot by trying to do all these projects? And I will admit that both myself, I won't speak for anyone else. I was in support of us doing it all, which was fundamentally a mistake. And if you was to ask me what my biggest mistakes have been in my journey doing Versus, that was one of the big ones, because in hindsight I should have known. But I was so driven by trying to just post the biggest number possible revenue-wise that I was just blinded. To just taking a moment and being like, no, of course we can't do both of these projects, or we can't do all of these projects.
So in that 2022, where obviously you don't hit the highs of 2021, you feeling pressure again, because obviously you had Austin saying in 2021, hey, if we don't hit this number, we're done. Yes, you made a profit at the end of that year, but the game of sales is you're only as good as your last quarter. So you have these struggles in 2022. Like, where does that leave you? Where does it leave the business?
But we didn't, because we made more money again.
Oh, okay.
That's how that year ended. We did make more money. Okay. And we always had this idea that with Versus, because it was a broader look at football, because it wasn't just on pitch, it was a look at the cultural elements and the social elements, that we shouldn't just have to work with Nike, Adidas, Puma, Umbro and New Balance, that we should be able to work with brands like Visa and Heineken and Spotify and KFC. And that's what ended up happening. The revenue reliance on Nike and Adidas dropped from 75% to about 25%. And we made up the rest with new clients, most of whom were not sportswear brands. There were brands that hadn't played in football a lot, or there were brands that were rights holders in football. So had a role to play in football, but weren't like directly connected in terms of their product. And we grew by 2% year on year. And honestly,
Growth is growth.
in all the years of doing Versus, I still consider that to be one of our greatest achievements.
Yeah, and also go on.
Was being able to grow that year.
I love that. And you mentioned the fact that like you're only 4 people, right? So
by this point, we're not done.
Okay, so you're growing.
Oh yeah, by this point, so during COVID, we probably, from the end of 2019 through to when COVID probably relaxed, we were probably up to about 6 people by then.
Okay.
And by the end of 2022, apologies if I got this wrong, guys, we were probably 7 or 8.
Okay, and today?
16 full time.
Okay.
So it's still small.
Yeah.
But we're getting there.
I'm gonna flip between the present and 2022 because I'm loving it. But we're at 16 people now, and you know I've had people who have like founded agencies, agencies and different businesses before. I'd always like to get an insight. Like you were number one, boots on the ground. When you're hiring people now, like what makes a good hire? Right, and to people who are listening and trying to break through into such a competitive industry, like listening to this podcast, what is it they can do to give themselves the best chance? Because we can't guarantee that you're going to get the job, but what gives themselves the best chance at standing out and getting a potential opportunity?
It's taken me years to figure this out. When I was working in recruitment and they would be hiring like loads of grads year on year, and I'd see them going off to the meeting rooms and interviewing people, I would say, oh, that must be so fun. I can't wait to hire people. And they'd say, Johnny, wait till you advance a little bit in your career and you'll see that recruiting is one of the worst, like internal recruiting is one of the worst parts of being a leader. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's one of the worst parts, but it is a very arduous task because normally you sit down with someone and within 5 minutes, the vast majority of the time you think, no, great person, but for us, it's not going to be right. For us, the things that are important, genuinely buying into the mission of the business. For us, it's slightly different to working a more faceless corporate job because we are an external facing brand. So buying into the mission of what we're about, this is genuinely making football more equitable and more culturally progressive. If you don't buy into that, it's not going to work. That's in any role. It's just not going to work. I think someone that can come in and will be able to communicate in a positive way internally is also really important because I interview people who absolutely buy into the mission of the brand. But when I think about how they would deal with the other people in the team internally, especially salespeople, without trying to walk all over other people, without putting the brand first, without being able to some extent, no one's able to do this completely, but to some extent, leave their ego at the door in some situations. Yeah. I think that's really important. Yeah. When it comes to sales, it's all about communication. Yeah. And most people we end up hiring in any role have done something to just illustrate that they care about the space. It's a little bit more than other people. Like there's a sales guy that works for me called Angus, who's an incredible person to work with and an incredible person to manage. Like with him, alongside being a salesperson in the previous business he worked at, he was doing writing for music publications, like Clash magazine predominantly. That's his main client. Like going to festivals all around Europe and doing reviews for festivals, just alongside his job because he loves the cultural space. Yeah. There's a guy called Jay who runs our TikTok, who, alongside working at Football Daily, had built his own football Instagram page to like 70,000 followers, following a fairly similar format to Versus. And we looked at that page and we were like, who is running this? We found out it was a 19-year-old kid from Brixton. Well, we got to hire him. Yeah. Got a girl called Lauren who works in my team as a creative strategist, and she like has a Substack blog. Is like chronically online. It's growing like a really credible TikTok channel. Most people coming in have done just something that just really proves that they just want to do this stuff in one way or another. There's a little bit more than the average person.
I love that. And just to like follow up on that, like 3 amazing examples. When it comes to their CVs, like, does it matter what's on their CV? Yes. Or are you looking, oh my God, like that stuck out to me, I'm going to push them through? Like, how good does the CV need to be alongside having, these extras?
No, the CV comes first.
Okay.
I almost say that as a given, which is why I didn't mention it. The CV comes first. And unfortunately for us, most of the time, we are obviously looking for relevant experience. And usually what I'm looking for is relevant experience at a direct competitor.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when I say direct competitor, I don't necessarily mean a football platform, but ideally a culture platform.
Yeah.
That's my ideal. If someone has worked at someone who is more of a legacy brand in our space, who's bigger, who has more experience actually figuring out how to run a business like ours, even if their role is not senior, that sticks out to me more than anything else. So in our space, we're talking about, of course, it wouldn't be, but a Complex UK. It's different because they're our sister company in some ways. A Hype Beast, a Hyson Abiety. If someone has worked at a company like that, that sticks out. But even more specifically, on a CV, what I want to see is what people have achieved, not what the job description is. That's a classic thing that I see on CVs, where it has their job title, the name of the company, and then just their roles and responsibilities. I don't care about the roles and responsibilities.
What did you do?
What did you do?
Yeah.
What are your best achievements? Of course, if we're talking about a salesperson, it's how you performed against your targets year on year is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah.
If it's more of a strategy role, it's like, what proposals did you put together that closed? What was the value of those proposals? Like the specifics of your best work, basically.
Yeah, and like, as you say that, I feel like when I used to look for jobs at places that I thought I would want to work, they were never online. Like the career page was always empty. You know, you mentioned the fact that you saw Boiler Room on LinkedIn. Like very rarely have I seen a brand where I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to be there, and the job is actually available to people. So that's what my question is it simply a case of we post on LinkedIn, we post on our website, and you just have to be so like entrenched with our brand, you will see the opportunity as soon as it comes up?
That's exactly it. If you really love the Versus brands, you won't miss us hiring a job.
That's a dagger to my heart because it's true. Yeah. I love it. All right, so yeah, we've spoken about that, and I know we digressed, but yeah, going back, you said you had a role before the Chief Commercial Officer. So
yes, so in, I believe, 2022, yes, it would have been, I hired another salesperson for the first time. That's Angus.
Yeah.
I almost can't put into words how well he's done since he joined. He's the perfect employee in many ways. Leaves his ego at the door, is relentless, closes business constantly, is a great person to manage internally, like everyone loves him. But he was the first person to join the commercial team. And when I started managing, I wanted to do two things. He came in as brand partnerships manager. I felt it was important to vacate the brand partnerships director vacancy so that he had something to look up to and immediately work towards. I thought that'd act as a good incentive for him. And I also felt that because I was managing as well as doing, that it made sense to have more of a senior job title. But also, I just wanted a better job title, and I wanted to give myself a bit of a pay rise. Because you got to remember, in this business, right, because we made this profit, it's really just us running it. All of the promotions and pay increases, they don't really mean much because we just set them ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a funny way of working. It's a bit different now. We're a little bit more of a proper company. But back then, I was just like, guys, I'm doing this. And everyone was like, yeah, cool, you deserve it.
Yeah.
So that was it. And we knew the team was going to grow a little bit more. And over time, yeah, we were doing bigger work. And I felt like it made sense for me to have more of a senior job title externally as well, because I was starting to build a little bit of a personal brand as well. And yeah, at that point as well, around that time was when it was confirmed that we talked about for a long time, for years, that I was definitely going to be given equity in the business for what I had done to help build it with the guys. So it was partly to do with that as well, a little bit. But more than anything, it was to illustrate the fact that I was managing.
Yeah. And what role was it? What job title? Sorry.
Head of partnerships.
Head of partnerships. Okay, nice. So you do that, and then like without skipping over it, because yeah, you're managing, but you're still like, you know, selling, doing a similar thing. I've introduced you on this podcast as a Chief Commercial Officer. So like, what does that role actually involve?
A lot of the same stuff. And to be fair, I am still selling, but I'm managing a lot more because the team is way bigger now. It's a team of, I think in total 6 people. Yeah. 2 other salespeople, soon to be 3, a creative strategist and 2 project managers. It's a much bigger team now. But also looking at how we grow the business outside of our core media partnerships revenue. Like we're growing a budding agency business. I'm looking at how we expand into that, how we launch other revenue areas like a direct-to-consumer area, looking at international markets and how it's a lot more in like the wider strategic business stuff.
Yeah.
but also talking to external parties around potential investment and acquisitions and all that sort of stuff. We're not going to sell for the time being, but we've had conversations, and it was important, I think, especially when we were going into having conversations with external people about them getting involved in the business at like a top level, that for both Corey and I, because at this point Corey was still editor-in-chief, and he wasn't really editor-in-chief anymore. He really was serving as more of a CEO role. And me and him were going out and having conversations with these people who were expressing interest in, do they want to buy the business? Do they want to invest in the business? And going to meetings like that with a job title of head of partnerships or editor-in-chief didn't feel like it really gave the appropriate weight. And I think that really importantly, I think that they also didn't give a strong enough indication that we own the business as well. Not just the two of us, it's four of us on the cap table. But I think that we had one meeting in particular with the first company ever that expressed an interest in buying Versus. And we went into it, and it was really clear actually that the person we were speaking to, that was the president of a huge business, was kind of like, you're the partnerships guy, you're the editorial guy. And we came out of it and it was a bit like, I don't think he really gets actually that we're like actually like running this whole business day to day. And we spoke to our main advisor at the time, and she actually said to us, I've been meaning to tell you this for ages, I just haven't brought it up. You need to change your job titles.
Okay, I love it. Like, that all makes sense. One thing that, as you've spoken about, I'm just thinking, like, where did you get, like, the business nous, the strategy? Like, it seems like you've been exposed to these roles and you've just kind of had to figure it out. But to somebody who, might be at like a little bit of a startup, or is looking to take on more of a leadership role, like, what is your approach to becoming more strategic? Because that doesn't just happen.
No, it doesn't. The first piece of advice I would give would be to take very close attention to the people more senior than you within the business. Like I talked about Sam Woods, who was my direct line manager at Boiler Room. He was huge for me. At Boiler Room, we didn't talk about that much, but I got given the job when I shouldn't really have been given it, just because I was so passionate about the brand. And he really just gave me the space for a whole year, kind of to just shadow him. He got made redundant when I did as well, by the way. That was huge. But within Boiler Room, there was also a guy who was the co-CEO called Stephen Appleyard, who is a great human being. He actually runs Hypebeast in Europe now, but he was the co-CEO of Boiler Room. He always gave me a lot of time. And he was like Chief Business Development Officer at Boiler Room when I joined, then got promoted to co-CEO. So I paid very close attention to what he was doing. That's why I had some understanding, because at that point, the path was clear. Both of those people had done partnerships jobs, Sam and Stephen, and then they'd sort of progressed into being more sort of leadership, and in Stephen's case, sort of C-suite. So I looked at them. Then when I joined, before at Contagious, there was a guy called Amar who was the managing director. I was like paying attention to how he moved. And then when I joined Versus, I committed for the first time in my life. And I talked about how I couldn't work hard in school, and I worked a little bit harder in university and a little bit harder in recruitment, and it's gone on and on. But when I joined Versus, I committed to actually just like reading books, listening to podcasts, doing like traditional learning, actually for the first time ever, funnily enough, and just getting a much better understanding of how these sorts of businesses work. And it's just come from that, really. The other thing I started doing at Versus that I'd never done before is I just message people and say, hey, really admire your career path, trying to grow this business. Would you mind meeting up for a coffee? And I always say most people who I message saying that say yes.
Yeah. And like, when you're looking for people to message, is it based on job title? Is it because like you just know the who's who of where they are because of like your insights into the industry? Like, we've spoken a lot about mentorship on this podcast, and some people have said mentorship is great. Others have said sometimes, it's mentorship for just mentorship's sake. So I suppose my question is, like, how is it you go about getting effective mentorship and choosing the right people?
To me, there's two kinds of mentorship. One is more of like the emotional kind, where, because emotional is not even the right terminology, mindset mentorship. Because what I've come to realize, the more senior I get, the bigger Versus gets, the more I do outside of work, it's kind of all about mindset. How much can you just continually execute, like day in, day out? That's where the big wins come from. It's just the small compounding interest over time of just continually executing. If you're like me and in school you were incapable of doing any work, I am obviously going to need some kind of mindset mentorship. So just show me, just push me very slowly in the direction of how can I just focus a little bit more. But then the other side of mentorship is like the really specific, I have already trodden the path that you're walking.
Yeah.
And I think both are incredibly valuable. But to me, a mentor has to be one or the other. If it's neither of those things, I don't really see...
If they're actually a mentor.
You talk about mentorship for mentorship's sake. I can see how that could be a thing.
Yeah.
If it's serving one of those purposes, I think that'd be cool. And when I'm reaching out to people, it's very much the like, I've walked the path that you're already walking. So it's people that have scaled media businesses or scaled agencies and exited, for example, or scaled media businesses and taken investment and gone on to grow it a lot more. You know, businesses that are maybe 2 years ahead of where we are, maybe 20 years ahead of where we are, but at some point, we're exactly where we are. 15 to 20 people doing X amount in revenue, worrying about how you grow it to the next level, and they've done it.
I love it, Johnny. This has been such a sick conversation. Like, to the listener who has gotten like to this point, yeah, if they're trying to, I know we've kind of touched upon it, but if they're trying to like break into this industry, or to somebody who's looking to maybe leave the current industry and search for somewhere where, you know, it's more aligned to their values, what would your key piece of advice be for them?
What would my key piece of advice be? This isn't answering your question, but I have to acknowledge how much harder it is for people at like 18 to 25 now who want to work in a cool industry like music or football, because whilst there was so much less opportunity when I was 21, there was so much less people who wanted to do it. It was not considered a viable career path, so it was so much easier. I think given how much more competitive it is, I think you just have to try and find your edge and lean into that. Don't try and be someone that you're not. Find your uniqueness and lean into that. Yeah. And that uniqueness might be an ability to write. It might be an ability to communicate. It might be an ability to just work harder than anyone else. And lean into that and tell people, if you do get the chance of an interview, that that's what your strength is. And that's the one thing you've got that no one else has got. Yeah. And also, don't be scared to reach out for help. And I talk about this so much on LinkedIn, but I have 2 slots in my own diary, and I'm just one example of one person. 5 p.m. on a Monday, 5 p.m. on a Friday. It's half an hour. If any young people who wants to follow a similar path to me, you know, they want to follow the path that I've trodden, I personally have time dedicated in my diary to do that. Wow. Other people do too, I hope. And with the people that have made it through mostly luck, let's be real, hear my stories. It's just a bunch of serendipity, really. Okay, there's some hard work in there. It's mostly luck. If through luck, like me, you get to a place where you do okay financially, you have a career that you genuinely love and care about, and you feel like you're growing, you have a responsibility to reach out and help the next person who wants to follow that path.
Yeah, drag them up the ladder.
You got to drag them up. You got to, you know, especially for me, you know, for our people, I have to use my privilege as a lighter skinned mixed race person to hold the door open for my darker skinned brothers and sisters. I have an inherent responsibility to do that. So reach out to people for help, basically, because I can speak for myself. I try and answer every message. Yeah. Try. I might not be able to, but if I can't, someone else will.
Yeah, I love it. And then finally, like obviously Versus over the last 5 years whilst you've been there, like the growth has been astronomical. Like, where do you see yourself and Versus in the next 5 and 10 years? This is the manifest corner.
In 5 years, I would want Versus to be like the dominant youth media brand that has a football bias. Like on a global scale, you know, doing regular work with the biggest players in the world, you know, huge global reach, you know, not just UK, Europe and North America, but talking about Africa and Asia as well. And just cut through at scale. Because at the moment, yes, if you're a young, diverse person from like a major city in the UK that likes football and culture, you actually might have heard of Versus now. That's huge for us. That there's an audience of people out there. If you have a certain sensibility, you might know who we are. Outside of that, no one's heard of us. The next level to get to is whether people even like football or not. The cool football thing, the same way the cool music thing was Boiler Room, the same way the cool sort of left field thing was Vice, and whether you liked them or not, you knew what it was at least. that's what I want for Versus in 5 years' time.
I love it. Well, hopefully we won't wait 5 years, but we'll run it back when this is a global platform as well. And
Exactly.
You'll be able to give me the updates. But Johnny, this has been a sick conversation. We've got a quick fire round.
Oh,
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Day at a stadium or music festival?
Music festival.
Money or happiness?
Happiness.
Would you want Versus to be known for innovation or community?
Community.
Exclusive scoop or viral content?
Exclusive scoop.
Work from home or work from the office?
Office.
Master one social platform or be good at many?
Mastermind social platform.
Would you rather travel to the past or future?
Pass.
Okay. And then finally, who's your dream dinner guest?
Virgil Abloh.
Okay,
May you rest in
RIP.
peace.
Yeah, Johnny, we do have a closing tradition on this podcast. With everything that you've been through and knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self? And would you still be doing the same thing?
Absolutely nothing. I'd leave that boy alone.
Yeah.
I'm 31 years old. I'm happy.
Wow.
How can I take anything away from the experience I've got?
Yeah.
That brought me to this place today. I'm not messing around with that.
Yeah. That's true contentment, right? And like from where you were as the person who worried to now, like just seeing that development. I hope people can listen to this and be inspired by the conversation. But yeah, Johnny, where can people find you, bro?
On every social platform, unfortunately. Not X though, but yeah, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. LinkedIn's just my full name, Johnny K. Instagram and TikTok is OJHNYN. It's just my name mixed up.
Yeah.
People often ask me if I'm Yoruba because of the OJ.
Yeah.
It's just Johnny and the letters jumbled up.
Yeah. Okay, sick, man. I'm going to be sure to link all of that in the show notes. And guys, if you've gotten to this point in the podcast, you know what to do. Please like, please subscribe, please comment. Please let us know who you want to hear from next. This has been another episode of What My Best Friend Does. If you didn't know, now you know. Now go and take some action.